I can still feel the weight of the pen in my hand, cool, heavy, and carrying the finality of something about to end. Spread out in front of me was the contract, its pristine white paper boldly marked with black ink that spelled out a version of my life I had never imagined. But this wasn't the end of a marriage. At least not officially. Marjorie, my wife for 6 years, had come up with what she called a trial separation. Not because she needed time to reflect or grow as a person, but because she wanted to try out a life with someone else. She wanted to move in with another man, be with him, explore what they could be, while keeping our marriage intact in the background, just in case she changed her mind later. "I need to know for sure, Lennox," she had told me, her voice soft and almost desperate, as though she were the one being wronged. I need to find out what's truly right for me." Anger should have rushed in. I should have flung the papers at her, told her to leave and never come back. But I didn't do any of that. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to find a trace of the woman who used to believe in us. The woman who had once promised that nothing could tear us apart. "Do you even hear what you're saying?" I finally asked, my voice tight with a mix of disbelief and pain. "You want me to sit around while you sleep with someone else, and then decide whether I'm still worth keeping?" She flinched at that, just briefly, before straightening up with steely resolve. "It's not just about that," she insisted. "Of course it is," I countered. "You wouldn't be suggesting this if it wasn't." Her expression twisted with irritation, like I was the one being unreasonable, as though she were the one going through a difficult time. "I need clarity," she mumbled, as if that single word could justify breaking the vows we made. She clung to that word like it made her actions logical, not cruel. What cut deepest wasn't just the proposal itself. It was the look in her eyes, the quiet certainty that she truly didn't see this as betrayal. I wanted to scream, to tell her I would never play second choice. But I remained frozen, staring at that paper, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It had become a bargaining process. A scenario where I was supposed to wait patiently while she explored another life. And in that silence, I realized I had a choice to make too. That night, I didn't sign the contract. I didn't tear it up either. I just sat there, silent, while Marjorie stood across the room with her arms crossed and a guarded expression. She was sure of herself, confident that I would either comply or explode. I did neither. I let the heavy silence hang in the air until it became too much for her. "Lennox, I don't get why you're making this so hard," she finally said, frustration edging her words like it always did when things didn't go her way. I lifted my eyes to hers, really looking at her. The woman in front of me was a stranger. The Marjorie I married had been warm, passionate, full of dreams. This version was distant, strategic. She had already chosen her path. I was just a hurdle she needed to remove with minimal mess. "Hard," I repeated, my tone flat. "You're asking me to wait around while you try out another man. And you don't see an issue with that." She sighed, exasperated. "It's not what you think." "No, Marjorie, it's exactly what I think," I replied, sliding the papers toward her. "If you want him, then be with him. But don't expect me to be waiting when you change your mind." Her lips tightened, her nostrils flaring just slightly. She hated losing control. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. I stood up, the sound of the chair scraping across the floor loud in the quiet room. "No, I'm just not reacting the way you expected. That's what's bothering you." Marjorie clenched her jaw but said nothing. She grabbed the papers, spun around, and stormed off. Her footsteps echoed through the house, followed by the dull thud of our bedroom door slamming shut. I didn't follow her. I didn't try to smooth things over. Instead, I stepped outside, letting the cool night air sting my skin. My thoughts were racing, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. I had spent years creating a life with this woman, believing we were solid, that we'd always fight for what we had. But it was clear she had already surrendered. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a priority and become a fallback option. I sat down on the front steps, staring at the stillness of the street. Part of me clung to the hope that this was temporary, that she would wake up and realize the absurdity of it all. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew she had already stepped away from our marriage. She was simply waiting for my permission to make it official. The next morning, I woke up in a bed that was once ours but now felt foreign. That wasn't unusual anymore. Marjorie had gradually moved into the guest room, whether for space or because she was slowly pulling away from me, I couldn't tell. But this morning, the quiet in the house didn't just feel empty. It felt hollow. I rubbed my face, then swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The house had an eerie chill, like all the warmth it once held had quietly vanished. As I stepped into the hallway, a part of me expected to see Marjorie stepping out of the guest room. But the door stood wide open, and when I glanced inside, the bed was still perfectly made. She hadn't spent the night there. Descending the stairs, my stomach twisted tighter with every step. That's when I noticed it, a letter placed right where the contract had been the previous evening. My name was written on the front. I opened it and read, "Lennox, I don't want to leave things this way. I need some space to understand what I'm feeling. I know that's the last thing you want to hear, but I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. For now, I'll be staying with Conrad. This isn't a permanent decision. I just need clarity. I hope we can talk soon. Marjorie." I stood there, staring at the letter, reading it again and again like maybe the words would change if I looked long enough. But they didn't. She was gone. Really gone. She had packed her things and left her home to stay with him. Conrad. I didn't know much about the guy. He worked in marketing, drove a flashy sports car, and carried himself with a kind of ease some people found magnetic. Evidently, Marjorie was one of them. But what I felt in that moment wasn't what I had expected. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Not even betrayal. Instead, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It was as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from my chest. Like I had been underwater for weeks, gasping for air, and someone had finally pulled me back to the surface. All the uncertainty, the constant anxiety of wondering where we stood, it was gone. She had made her decision, and now I had to make mine. I folded the letter neatly and dropped it into the kitchen trash can. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on the one name I knew I could rely on. Harlan, my oldest and most dependable friend. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. I told him I needed a favor, my tone calm and steady. Was the lake house still available? There was a short pause. Yeah, thinking of getting away? He asked. I let out a slow breath. Something like that. Harlan didn't press for details. That's the beauty of real friendship, they show up without needing the whole story. Keys are in the lockbox, he said. Stay as long as you need. Thanks, man. After the call ended, I didn't hesitate. I packed a small suitcase with just enough clothes for a couple of weeks and walked out the front door. No emotional farewells, no second-guessing if she might come back. Marjorie had stepped toward her future, now it was my turn to move toward mine. As I drove away and caught one last glimpse of our house in the rearview mirror, it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a place where I used to live. The road ahead stretched out, quiet and lined with tall trees gently swaying in the evening breeze. Each passing mile should have felt like a step toward freedom, like I was finally shedding the heaviness of the past few weeks. But instead, I was met with a different realization. I wasn't running from anything. Marjorie may have physically left first, but emotionally I had started drifting long before she packed her bags. Not in a way that meant I had betrayed her, but in the sense that I had been mourning our relationship while it was still intact. Ours had been a slow decline, something fading quietly for months, maybe even years. I hadn't been ready to admit it until now, but I had already started letting go. I always thought betrayal would come with fury, maybe some dramatic outburst. But all I felt was a deep, creeping emptiness. A hollow space inside my chest that told me I had lost her long before she realized she was gone. By the time I reached the lake house, the sun had vanished below the horizon, leaving a soft, dusky glow over the water. I turned off the car and sat for a moment, watching the way the trees reflected on the still lake. It was all so peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had taken root in my mind lately. I stepped out, stretched, and made my way to the front porch. The lockbox code worked just like Harlan said. Within minutes, I was inside, greeted by the familiar smell of wood and earth. I had been here once before, back when things were simpler, back when Marjorie and I were just two people in love, untouched by the complications of life. I dropped my bag by the door and exhaled deeply. I should have felt liberated, like I was reclaiming control over my life. But what I felt instead was a creeping uncertainty. Was I really ready to accept this? Was I truly okay with her walking away and me just letting it all go as if none of it had mattered? I made my way into the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water, trying to quiet the chaos spinning in my head. Without even thinking, I pulled out my phone and hovered over Marjorie's name in my contacts. I wasn't sure what I hoped for, that maybe she'd be the one to reach out first, or that she'd suddenly realize she'd made a mistake and come running back. Instead, I did something I hadn't dared in ages. I opened her social media profile. That's when the numb feeling I'd been holding on to began to crack. There she was, smiling, laughing, sitting across from Conrad at some restaurant, looking relaxed, content completely unburdened. She had posted a picture, nothing dramatic, just a plate of food, a glass of wine, and a caption that read, "New beginnings." Those two words hit me like a punch. She wasn't grieving the end of us. She wasn't lying awake wondering how I was holding up. She had already started over long before she even told me she was leaving. The glass in my hand trembled, and I quickly set it down before my frustration pushed me to do something reckless. I swallowed hard, feeling how dry my throat had become. Maybe I believed that walking away would bring clarity, a sense of calm. But staring at that photo, it hit me, peace wasn't just going to appear. It was something I'd have to create piece by piece. And for the first time since she left, I let myself face a difficult truth. I didn't know where to start. I woke to the soft chirping of birds outside the window, the sound piercing through the fog of another restless night. The lake house was still, too still. The silence wasn't comforting, it felt heavy, like it filled the space around me. Sleep had barely come. Every time I closed my eyes, that image returned, Marjorie with her effortless smile and that wine glass already moving forward like I had been a short chapter in her story. Dragging myself out of bed, my muscles stiff from tension, I headed to the kitchen. The cold floor stung my bare feet as I poured a cup of old coffee from the untouched machine Harland kept around. I leaned against the counter and stared out the window. The lake was calm, its surface mirroring the trees so perfectly that it felt like the world had paused. But inside me, there was no such stillness. My mind was storming. I knew I should have erased every trace of her, deleted her number, removed the messages. But instead, I opened our last conversation. The final message she sent still sat there, "I hope we can talk soon." What did that even mean? Did she think we could just stay in touch, keep things civil? Was I supposed to wait patiently while she figured out her next move, just to pick up where we left off? I set the phone down and let out a sharp breath. I needed to focus on something else, anything else. That's when I remembered Harland mentioning the neighbors. When he handed me the keys to the lake house, he casually noted that the previous family had moved out a few months back, and now a woman lived there. "Keeps to herself," he had said. "Seems nice enough." I hadn't paid much attention then. But now, desperate to escape my own mind, I stepped outside. The morning sun cast long shadows over the porch as I stretched my legs and followed the dirt path toward the neighboring house. I wasn't planning to meet anyone, wasn't looking for a conversation. I just needed to move, to breathe something other than grief. As I walked, I noticed someone sitting by the water. A woman, alone on the dock, legs swinging just above the lake. She held a mug in both hands, dark hair pulled back loosely with strands dancing in the breeze. She looked completely at ease, like the stillness belonged to her. I should have kept going. Should have turned around. But something made me pause. Then, as if sensing me, she turned. Our eyes met. Her expression was calm, unreadable. Then, without hesitation, she smiled, not politely, not forced. Just genuine. And in that moment, something deep within me shifted. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't a spark. It was simply a reminder. A quiet acknowledgement that life continued, that the world extended far beyond the confines of my broken marriage. I gave her a small nod and continued on my way, aware of her gaze lingering on me until I vanished around the bend. Maybe I wasn't ready to let go. Maybe it would take more time than I wanted to admit. But for the first time since everything fell apart, I understood something important. I didn't have to be stuck. I didn't have to keep living in the shadow of the man Marjorie walked away from. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to figure it all out alone. I didn't go back to the dock the next day. Or the day after that. Something about that moment. The woman's quiet demeanor and the way she looked at me, without any trace of pity or expectation, had unsettled something deep within me. It wasn't about being drawn to her, nor was it a matter of intrigue. It was more about the subtle, disorienting truth that, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was seen as just a person. Not the man who had been left behind. Not the guy whose identity had been shaped by loss. Just a man, standing under the sun, acknowledged by another soul. And honestly, I didn't know how to handle that. So I retreated. I stayed holed up indoors, lost in my own thoughts, spending countless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if Marjorie ever thought of me like I did of her. Did she ever lie awake beside Conrad, questioning her choices? Wondering if she had acted too hastily? I nearly managed to convince myself that the brief moment I had shared with the woman by the dock had meant nothing, that it was just one of those random, forgettable encounters. But then came the third morning. A knock at the door broke the silence. A sound so ordinary, yet it struck me like a lightning bolt. No one knocked anymore. I hesitated before answering. And there she was again. Up close. She had an even stronger presence. Not flashy, but grounded in a way that made everything around her feel a little steadier. She exuded that quiet confidence of someone who seemed to belong wherever she went. No explanations needed. She wore a worn-out denim jacket over a plain white tee, her hands resting casually in her pockets. "Hey!" she greeted, like we had known each other for years. I blinked, momentarily confused. "Huh? Oh hey." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes quietly sizing me up, as if making some internal decision. I figured, since we keep running into each other, maybe it's time we actually introduced ourselves. Her approach caught me off guard. I'd spent so long isolating myself, buried in my own head. I had forgotten how natural and simple real interaction could be. "I'm Lennox," I finally said, my voice rougher than I expected. A genuine smile crossed her face. "Leona." The name echoed in my thoughts. Leona. Felt fitting. Solid. No frills. She didn't explain why she was there, didn't offer excuses or small talk. Somehow I respected that. She was simply there because she had chosen to be. "I made too much coffee," she said, lifting a thermos like it was the most logical reason in the world to knock on a stranger's door. "Thought I'd share." I paused. I probably should have said no, maybe mentioned I wasn't really up for company. But instead, I stepped back, held the door open. "Come in." She entered like she belonged there, her eyes briefly scanning the cabin. Its modest layout, the still-packed bag beside the couch, the dishes piling up in the sink. No judgment in her glance, just calm observance. She placed the thermos on the counter and leaned back against it, arms folded. "So," she began, "you hiding out or just passing through?" Her question was direct, but there was no edge to it. Just curiosity without pressure. I let out a breath. "Hiding, I think." She nodded with quiet understanding. "Yeah, I've done that." That made me pause. "You have." Without missing a beat, she poured the coffee into 2 mugs she'd found without needing to ask, handing one to me. "MHM. Different reasons, same instinct. I needed space, to get away, figure out who I was once the dust settled." I took a sip, letting the warmth work its way through me. "And did you figure it out?" A small grin played on her lips as she lifted her mug. "Not exactly." But I stopped waiting for the answer to magically appear. I looked at her for a while, something shifting inside me. For weeks, I had been stuck, waiting for clarity, for the pain to subside, for some sign to show me the way forward. Maybe that was the issue. Maybe it wasn't about waiting at all. I had no idea what this moment meant, if it even meant anything. But for the first time since Marjorie left, my mind wasn't on her. And that, for now, felt like enough. The following morning, I was up before dawn. Not from a bad dream or that familiar heaviness pressing on my chest, but because something inside me had grown quiet. Not in a hollow way, just still. The lake house lay silent around me, and outside, everything remained untouched. The lake's surface was smooth like glass, and the trees swayed gently under the early morning breeze. I stood by the window with a fresh mug of coffee in hand, watching the first streaks of sunlight stretch across the sky. It had been years since I watched a sunrise. My mornings used to be predictable, waking beside Marjorie, preparing for work, repeating the same routine day after day. It hadn't been a bad life, just an automatic one. I hadn't realized how much of it was lived on autopilot until it all disappeared. There I stood, caught in a strange space that felt both fleeting and strangely lasting, uncertain about what step to take next. When the knock came, it didn't surprise me like before. Without pausing, I opened the door, already sure of who would be waiting on the other side. Leona stood there, leaning comfortably on the porch railing, balancing 2 paper bags in one hand and a thermos in the other. Figured you didn't bother picking up actual groceries before coming out here, she said with a smirk. My eyes dropped to the bags. What's in there? She gave a nonchalant shrug. Breakfast. Without a word, I stepped aside to let her in. It had stopped feeling strange, her being there, her moving through my space as if it were as familiar to her as her own. Her presence didn't press on me or ask anything of me. Simply was. We sat down at the little wooden table, and I pulled a warm breakfast sandwich from the bag. Leona took a bite of hers before speaking again. So, she began between mouthfuls. What's your plan? I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Plan? She gestured broadly around the cabin. Are you planning to stay out here forever? Just disappear into the woods like some heartbroken character from a dramatic novel? A small smile tugged at my lips, the first in what seemed like an eternity. Maybe. Do you have something against tragic book characters? She chuckled. Depends on the book. But if you start penning poems about your ex, I'm gone. I exhaled sharply through my nose, something close to laughter escaping me for the first time in weeks. But her question echoed in my mind. What was the plan? Honestly, I didn't have one. I had been drifting, reacting to life rather than directing it, running from confrontation instead of facing the truth. When Marjorie walked away, she took the reins of our story with her, and I hadn't stopped her. Leona must have noticed something shift in my expression because she leaned in slightly, her voice softer this time. You know, waiting for everything to suddenly make sense never works. Believe me, sometimes you just have to decide on the next step, even if you don't have the full picture yet. I stared at her, really looked. I didn't know much about her. Not truly. Yet she had a way of quieting the chaos in my mind, breaking through the layers of doubt and hesitation with words that landed exactly where they needed to. That's probably why I found myself saying something I hadn't even dared to admit in my own head. I don't think I want her back. The words hung there, thick in the silence that followed. Leona didn't flinch. She just nodded, like she had known all along. And maybe I had too. I just hadn't been ready to voice it. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I felt it, the return of something I hadn't felt in a long while. Control. Not over the past or other people's actions, but over myself, my emotions, my path, my future. After that breakfast with Leona, something within me clicked into place. I stopped hoping that clarity would suddenly appear. I stopped waiting for a sign from the universe. Instead, I made a decision. I let go of the past. Later that afternoon, I pulled out my phone and stared at Marjorie's name one last time. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. There was only a sense of closure. I typed out a message. I'm not waiting for you to figure things out anymore. I hope you discover what you need. I already have. I pressed send before I could talk myself out of it and immediately blocked her number. That was it. No more wondering. No more what-ifs. Felt right. Felt liberating. Over the following days, I settled into a new pace. Mornings spent by the water, evenings beside the fire, quiet conversations with Leona that weren't weighed down by sorrow or regret. She never pushed for more than I was ready to give. Maybe that's why I felt safe enough to share anyway. I told her about the better days with Marjorie, the Sunday morning dances in the kitchen, the way she always stole fries off my plate, even after insisting she wasn't hungry. And I told her about the harder moments, the slow distance that crept in over time, how we had become little more than two people sharing space, how she had emotionally checked out long before she physically left. Leona listened without judgment, just quietly nodding, present. Then one evening, as we watched the sun disappear into the lake, she turned to me and asked, "So, what now?" And for once I had an answer. I go home. Not to my old routines, not to the version of myself that stayed still, waiting for someone else to choose, but to something new, something I chose. A few days later, I packed up my things, locked the door to the lake house, and stood outside for a final moment, breathing in the crisp air. I felt lighter than I had in months. Leona was on her porch, watching. "You know," she said with a teasing smile, "I think you're going to be just fine, Lennox." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, I think you're right. And with that, I got behind the wheel, turned the key, and drove ahead into a future that, for the first time in ages, was fully mine.